Okay, so HIMS have done it again with their expansion. They have now launched a menopause category, and we're going to talk about the total addressable market and what I think about this as a new category for the company. I'm also going to share my thoughts on HIMS and Hers stock and where I think it's going in the short term and in the long term. And you may be surprised of my opinion. What I did want to say, obviously, as always, this does not constitute as financial advice, and this certainly does not constitute as medical advice. I have no medical training. So, HIMS have expanded into menopause as of an announcement on their website yesterday. As HIMS investors, we all knew this was coming, but I'm actually surprised that it came this quickly, given how aggressively they have been expanding other areas of their platform in 2025. And this has always continuously impressed me about HIMS, how they're able to deploy new categories at such a rate. This shows incredible organizational properties within the company and excellent management, right? So menopause, as they state on their website, affects 1.3 million women each year in the United States. And the menopause can often go on for multiple years. So it's affecting a lot of women at any one time. But I also learned that only 20 to 30% of gynecological programs actually have formal menopause training, which really surprises me. This actually results in menopause fitting very well into HIMS' existing suite of medications that they offer, because it's something that's stigmatized. It's something that's very difficult for women to go through, right? Particularly when such a big part of being a woman is that ability to have children, if you choose to have children. And with menopause, that's obviously ceasing. It's something that, it's a condition that goes on over an incredibly long term. And whilst it's not life-threatening, a lot of the time it can be very difficult, particularly because of those hormonal changes that disrupt you both mentally and physically. So it fits into HIMS really well if women feel a bit neglected in the conventional healthcare space when it comes to menopause, and they can actually go onto HIMS. HIMS have a massive opportunity to give them the attention they deserve. And also there are a very wide array of treatments when it comes to menopause, right? So with menopause, your hormones fluctuate, your progesterone and your estrogen drop. And some women would opt for those hormone levels to be restored to alleviate the problem as to why they're not feeling so well. Other women may opt for not doing that. They may not want a hormonal treatment, and they may actually just look for other medications to alleviate the side effects of menopause. However, this does mean that in the conventional healthcare industry, where menopause is not getting the attention that it deserves, women are trying a spray and pray approach themselves, and HIMS can obviously help with that, particularly when HIMS have their compounding pharmacies and they can obtain data and over time develop more personalized solutions, more compounded formulations, and basically also just help women feel better about themselves when they're going through a transition that can be very long and very difficult to deal with. So I think in conclusion to this part, this is an excellent category for HIMS to expand to, and it comes after HIMS expanding internationally and obviously doing their blood testing acquisition, which may actually be necessary for menopause as well. So that's great that they would be able to be linked up together. And also they launched their testosterone package just last month. So they've got a lot that they're working on right now. I also wanted to talk about, because the last video that I made on HIMS was probably my first video on HIMS that was a little bit bearish, and I wanted to talk about how I feel about the stock right now and where I think it's going in the short term and the long term. First, in the context of menopause, as part of this announcement, they said that this is going to help the Hers business reach over 1 billion in annual revenue in 2026. So that is their target. And let's look at that in the context of HIMS' overall revenue. So I found that in their FY24 letter at the end of last year, it stated that the Hers brand was over 30% of revenue in the fourth quarter. So we can take that 30% as a basic barometer, because I don't think there was anything that would massively distort those weightings between HIMS and Hers. So 30% of revenue in 2024 would be 443 million on just under 1.5 billion that HIMS reported in 2024 overall. So that is the figure for 2024. And obviously they're forecasting over 1 billion in 2026 with this announcement, with the menopause being obviously a tailwind and a contributor to that. So If we take the same weighting for the midpoint of their revenue guidance for 2025, which is 2.35 billion at the midpoint, that's 705 million at 30%. So that's pretty good. That's roughly what HIMS would be in 2025. And now they're forecasting over $1 billion for 2026. So obviously HIMS are forecasting 2.35 billion in revenue for 2025. And they've also got this 6.5 billion in revenue target for 2030. Very impressive stuff. Now, if you do a 5-year compounded annual growth rate on that from 2025 until the 2030, where they reach that 6.5 billion, maybe, that is a 22.6% CAGR. So that's the sort of growth that we're looking at ongoing. I'm basically just trying to forecast roughly what I think the revenue will be for 2026 and then try to work out how much is Menopause as a contributor to that. And then we will talk about overall revenue and where I see the stock price overall. Yeah, if they're doing this 22.6% CAGR until 2030, I think revenue growth is probably going to be faster than that, right? The assumption is they grow faster at the start and then it slows down a little bit. It's funny because for 2026, the median analyst growth is only 19.5%. So very, very slow. And it seems like, unless there's huge acceleration, the analysts don't think, or it's not priced in, at least on the institutional side, that they will get to that 6.5 billion in 2030. And I've also pointed out on my channel that I don't really think it's priced in, because if HIMS keep up this growth trajectory, if you look at it between 6 and 8 times sales on that 6.5 billion, that would be between a 39 and a 52 billion market cap. And obviously HIMS are way down at the moment, right? So there's really good growth there if they hit those targets. Now, back on point. Let's say revenue growth for 2026 is 25%, which I think that's quite conservative. However, they are going through some headwinds at the moment, which affects my short-term view on HIMS, which I will go through in a minute. At 25% revenue growth on that 2.35 billion, we're getting to 2.937 billion. And they're saying that hers will be over 1 billion. So on that, hers would be 34% of the business. So we are forecasting that if the revenue growth is 25%, hers will be 34% of the business, which is actually not that much considering that 25% growth is quite slow. Let's say, for example, if we think that HIMS revenue growth would be much faster than that, obviously the percentage of hers, if they hit 1 billion, won't be much more than 30%. Or the other option is they actually really exceed by a wide margin this 1 billion of annual revenue from hers. So if hers remained 30% weighting at that 2026 revenue forecast, which again, I think is quite conservative, of 2.937 billion, hers would be making 881 million on 30%. So that is implying that this menopause category, which otherwise wouldn't be there, would initially contribute slightly over 100 million in the first year, right? Because they're not really going to be making much revenue from it in 2025. So 100 million in the first year is pretty good. It's nothing like GLP-1, which did 200 million in a few quarters. And then GLP-1 Q1 was 230 million and Q2 was 190 million, but still meaningful. And that brings me on to my next point, is that GLP-1 obviously grew extremely quickly, right? 200 million in the first year, but they initially announced it in May. And in Q1, 230 million. And then in Q2, after semaglutide got taken off the shortage list, it went down to 190 million. And obviously there are some GLP-1 headwinds right now, but HIMS are continuing to still offer it. So GLP-1 revenue went down, and core revenue, if you minus GLP-1 revenue from total revenue, core revenue was flat quarter on quarter, which I would conclude is my biggest bear point when it came to HIMS's last quarter in terms of their results. So obviously this resulted in HIMS's revenue going down quarter on quarter. If you add those 2 quarters up and then add their guidance for Q3, which is 580, then in Q4 they need to do 639 million in revenue. So from Q2 to Q3, they're forecasting a revenue re-acceleration, and they're forecasting their revenue to be basically the same as what they did in Q1. Now, I think because of the trajectory we saw last quarter, and it's hard because obviously they don't break out their what we call core or their non-GLP-1 revenue explicitly. It's just something that we're able to work out because we got that GLP-1 number. I think that 580 could be quite a difficult target to hit. I think it'd be quite difficult for them to equal that first quarter of 586 million in revenue, given that GLP-1 is decelerating and we saw flat core-on-core growth. However, some of that flat core-on-core growth could be down to customers that had to cancel their GLP-1. That was also an additional treatment, right? When that part of the revenue would be included in core. So I'm not too sure about how it will look for Q3. And as I said, in Q4, in order to hit the midpoint of that guidance, they would have to generate 639 million in revenue, which is much more than any of the other previous quarters in 2025. And yes, they've got their hormone health, which we've touched on, the testosterone and the menopause. They are going to be, I think, huge drivers of revenue if HIMS can get this right and do what they've done with GLP-1. However, I think we'll see more meaningful revenue in 2026. And the same with Zava, which is their international expansion. I imagine that will probably take even a bit longer. And Tribe Labs, again, that's going to take a bit of time to integrate. So HIMS is definitely at a pivot. It's absolutely at a pivot where there's a lot of really interesting long-term things going on. And remember, this company has a massive history of being able to move incredibly fast. And that leads me to conclude that I'm still very bullish on the company long-term. However, one thing that I'm noticing is maybe they're not going to beat this Q3 by a wide margin. Maybe they won't beat it at all. And again, that's not me saying I can predict the future. I'm just thinking maybe with the trajectory of how things went the first two quarters, they may have a hard time getting to that 2.35 billion. They probably won't beat the 2.4 billion, and they almost certainly won't raise guidance for the rest of 2025. And obviously the stock has recently done very, very well. So the stock may crash hard. And I remember Q4 of 2024, where that was just one of the most beautiful quarters I'd ever seen. And guess what? The stock crashed hard. So the market is not very giving when it comes to HIMS. They always are expecting a blowout quarter because HIMS has historically performed so well. So I think we could get some short-term negative price action. That being said, the things that counteract that are qualitatively, from a business standpoint, HIMS have got a lot of very fascinating things to say and huge revenue potential in these next couple of quarters, in addition to potentially giving really good quantitative guidance for FY26 when they report in Q4. However, this may not be too aggressive. Maybe it's going to be a bit more aggressive guidance for 2027 because it looks like that menopause, whilst, the guidance for 1 billion in HERS is okay, it's suggesting that menopause is not contributing hundreds and hundreds of millions in revenue, but rather just shy of 100 or around about 100. But you never know. We may see really good quantitative guidance from HIMS in FY26. Either way, they've got a lot to work on, and eventually this meaningful revenue will come through. It'll just be interesting to see whether, if they miss in Q3, that will spook the market or not. And as I said, they may not, but I just have a hunch that they might, and they might be a bit conservative when reporting guidance for Q4. They'll talk about all of these amazing verticals that they're working on, and probably give more aggressive guidance as we come into 2026. And where does that leave the stock? We still have over 30% of the float short. So what does that mean? It just means the stock could go either way because it's almost like a leverage on the stock, right? There's only so many shares out there, and if the stock goes down, it can cause a lot of negative momentum, hence why we see the volatility after earnings. But if the earnings are good, then it could really cause a squeeze. And you see that in the news. HIMS was up 16% yesterday on this news. And it just goes to show you that just on some news, they can move 16%, both because of the excitement of the company, but also because you've got such a high percentage of the float that's short.